Welcome to Black and Blue, the podcast that's just for you. We bring solutions to everyday problems. We are here to humanize the badge by interviewing first responders and discussing their trainings, experiences, and publications. Black and Blue airs weekly at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tune in.
Here, like you said, 47 states and 3 countries. That's an amazing career, along with all the accolades just from a ride-along.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. Your best recruits are every officer. You know, we put a lot of stake in these specialty assignments and these recruiters and this and that. But man, we are our best recruiters, and we should be telling people that because it is, regardless of what has occurred in the last several years, it's the greatest profession on the planet. We get to do things that people go to movies and see and watch on TV. There's a reason why they don't have ride-along programs for accountants or lawyers, right? Nobody would go. But in our profession, people want to come see what we do behind the curtain, so to speak. And that has not changed. Everything else may have changed around us, but the job itself and what we do really hasn't changed at its core.
Got you to want to write a book?
Well, first thing, Clea, I didn't want to train in leadership. I, like many people out there listening, have been to the law enforcement leadership classes, and everybody rolls their eyes because we know what they're typically like. I mean, I've been to all of it, you know, FBI National Academy, which is great if you want to learn how to drink. It's a good program, don't get me wrong. But I mean, a lot of it is, you know, let's face it, if the leadership training actually worked in our profession, we wouldn't be in the state and the profession we are now, because we're the most trained with more certificates on our wall than we've ever been. And we don't exactly do things right all the time. And so I kind of had a sour taste. I've been through a lot. I mean, I was training for IACP, leadership in police organizations. I've done all this stuff. And so the last thing I wanted to do was train in leadership. I was training in tactics and safety, risk management. I still do a class called Seconds for Survival, which is really popular, which talks about pre-attack indicators. I enjoy doing that stuff, but I started seeing post-Ferguson that our profession really, the leadership wasn't prepared for what was happening. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. You know, I mean, we had never dealt with Ferguson and post ever, really. I mean, we've always had our detractors, but everything kind of seemed to come together. And I saw a lot of us not telling the truth or letting people not tell the truth. And, you know, where officers weren't necessarily wrong, we were still throwing officers under the, I saw a lot of things going wrong in law enforcement leadership. And I'll never forget, I drove down to Dallas, Texas and met a friend of mine, Keith Winslow, who's a retired Dallas officer. And I talked to him about it. And he just really encouraged me. He said, you need to quit complaining. You need to get after it. And so I launched a seminar back about 10 years ago called Courageous Police Leadership. And I wrote the book. I started writing in 2017, 2018. But I wrote the book because I thought, well, man, not everybody can come to class. I'll write the book. Maybe I can reach a few other people. And as you know, you've written books, Coach. It was a very arduous task. And I'll never forget, you've read the book, so you know it's a little bit different than most. Because the last thing I wanted to do was do what everybody else is doing. When you get to leadership, let's face it, we could read a few John Maxwell books, put a few slides together, and a lot of people could talk about this stuff. But I wanted to move leadership from an ideology from our head to our heart, to where we would actually take action. Because leadership does no good in a book, it does no good if we know it. And so I really wanted to push the envelope and push some buttons to really encourage people to really lead, even if it cost them everything, hence courageous leadership. Because sometimes when you do the right thing, you're punished for it, right? And that's why we see so many of our leaders sort of not doing what needs to be done, because they're all concerned about their personal safety, which is not leadership. You know, leadership is about serving others, even at their own peril. And I'll never forget, the day before the book was going to be published, my editor contacted me and he said, hey, are you sure you want to publish this? I said, what are you talking about? I've worked 3 years on this. Pretty much every weekend for 3 years, I was holed up in a Starbucks or a coffee shop somewhere pecking away at it. I said, what are you talking about? Of course I want to publish. He goes, well, Travis, you're still on the job. I don't necessarily really understood what he was saying, but what he was saying is, man, if you publish this, you may have hell to pay. You're still working in law enforcement. And I said, and yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say I was a little bit nervous. But then I thought, man, I just wrote a book called Courageous Police Leadership. What kind of person am I if I don't publish the dang thing? Because I'm scared, right? And so we published it. To this day, I'm still amazed. I get contacted every week about it. Someone has found it. It's still doing fairly well. As you know, that's really tough to do in a world out there where there's a lot of stuff, a lot of resources for people. So I'm very, very blessed, very honored. Yes, I caught some issues, caught some trouble. Some folks in the media didn't like what I had to say. But it's well, and I tell people to this day, if you don't like what I say, if it's not true, bring it, right? I will own it. But if what I say is true and you don't like it, that's not necessarily my issue. So I was very, very careful when I wrote it to make sure we sourced it very, very well, that it wasn't just some emotional piece, that it was sourced well. How can departments use data? It's easy. On your website, you have all the data. Don't let someone else define your data. Put the race, ethnicity of the people that you're arresting and stopping. Then right next to it, put the population. Don't be scared of that. But then right next to that, put the race and ethnicity of people committing Part 1 crimes. People that are victims of Part 1 crimes, people that are committing Part 1 crimes. And the reason Part 1 crimes is important is we don't invent those crimes. Those are a real victim that calls us and we go investigate it. Rape, robbery, assault, arson, homicide, right? We don't control those crimes. You need to put those on the website for people to see because it gives context to this disparity. Now, if the Part 1 crimes and the arrest are off, you may have a problem. But don't tell me that arrest and population is the only number we're looking at, because that is out of context. And so all the department has to do is they don't have to give any narrative. They don't have to give an opinion. Just put the data out there for people to see, because they all have the data, Coach. And they say, well, I can't do that. Why not? You're letting other people make you think you're racist. Just put the data out there and let the public see it, because most people are pretty smart. They just want to see transparency. And I think they're scared of having to explain why that is. That's not our explanation to have. We ought to be involved in social groups and groups to help men be fathers and groups to help single mothers. And we ought to be involved in groups to help rehabilitate people. We ought to be involved in our schools to help these kids. We ought to be involved at young ages, and we are in a lot of places. But at the end of the day, if they end up encountering law enforcement as committing a crime, it's not our fault that they got there. We just have to do our job. And so that fact right there, if there was one thing we could do as leaders from a data standpoint, is we need to tell people the truth about the data, because that's why you'll hear this constantly. I challenge you, every time you hear somebody talking about this department or this reform, they're all talking about population. And in my class, I break it down pretty simple. I said, whose subject that you're going to use force on tonight? And most people don't know what to say. No, if you walk in the convenience store, or you're just going to walk up and bash somebody with your baton. I don't know if that's a thing now, but I'm old. And they're like, well, no. I said, well, what would cause you to use force? Well, they're committed a crime and they're resisting arrest. Yeah, exactly. So you have to compare our activity to those that commit crime. And what scares me about us not doing it, Coach, is we don't really know if we have a problem in our department as far as racial profiling or whatever by not doing that. We don't know. So we need to know those numbers, because not every department's perfect. We certainly could have issues out there. I know the departments that have personally asked me to run the numbers, they've been pretty much right on the spot, within 0.5%, so to speak.
Right.
It could be an issue, but if we don't know those numbers, we don't know that. We just think we know. And so that's a pretty easy thing to do. The FBI collects that information. Every department is required to collect that information. I don't know why we don't report it. In fact, I've had departments lately that say that they report the stops and arrests and population, they won't report the other ones. I said, why? And I don't know why, but that may be going along with the narrative, because when you do that, the people that are taking advantage of that out of context data aren't going to be happy, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we placate that. We ought to just be very transparent and very true. I think the public deserves that. And then I think once we do that, Coach, we can start talking about how can we correct that, because we should want to correct that.
Yeah.
We really should.